The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through it. A man was there named Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was rich. He was trying to see who Jesus was, but on account of the crowd he could not, because he was short in stature. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore tree to see Jesus, because he was going to pass that way. When Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said to him, "Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today." So Zacchaeus hurried down and was happy to welcome Jesus. All who saw it began to grumble and said, "He has gone to be the guest of one who is a sinner." Zacchaeus stood there and said to the Lord, "Look, half of my possessions, Lord, I will give to the poor. And if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I will pay back 4 times as much." Then Jesus said of him, "Today salvation has come to this house, because Zacchaeus too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek out and to save the lost." The Gospel of the Lord. In my first year at the University of Guelph, my roommate was an agnostic and a vegetarian. I think I was quite the curiosity to him, and to be honest, I'm probably still a curiosity to many people. But I'll never forget one question he asked me in our first year. We were having breakfast in the cafeteria on a Saturday morning, and he said, "Raph, I've got a question for you." I said, "Okay." And he said, "If tomorrow morning you had undisputable proof that God did not exist, what would you do different, other than church and praying?" I pushed back a little bit about what he meant by proof and by God, but he said, "Just answer the question. Tomorrow you wake up, God doesn't exist. What do you do differently, besides going to church or praying?" To be honest, I'm not very proud of what I said. It's not worth repeating, but it had mostly to do with violence and letting my anger have free rein. I know this sounds terrible, but I also found my answer deeply unsatisfying. But it's all I had that day. It must have seemed to my roommate that God was little more than just some policeman in the sky to me, deterring me from doing worse things. But I wonder how many people who grow up Catholic also feel this way, that when the rubber hits the road, this is the only difference God makes. Well, you might say, well, I would still be a good person. Good. But my roommate's question was not what we'd still do, but what we'd do different. In other words, point to something where God actually makes a difference in your life, besides going to Mass or praying. Questions like this, I think, make us, or at least it made me, uncomfortable. But sometimes, actually most of the time, uncomfortable things are the things we actually need to address. And I'm actually grateful for my friend, and we still are friends today, for challenging me to tell him that day what difference God actually made in my life. In today's Gospel, we hear Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through it. Jericho is one of the oldest continually inhabited cities in the world, going back something like 11,000 years. It's the lowest city in the world, sitting at 258 meters below sea level. That's like half the CN Tower. And it's literally an oasis in the desert. It's watered by a number of underground springs, to the point that people called it the city of palms, as in palm trees, which need a lot of water. To give you an idea of just how much water we're talking, one of the larger springs in the Jericho Plain is the Ain es Sultan, or the Sultan Spring, which produces 1,000 gallons of water per minute. That's a lot of water. And water is a pretty important resource in a desert economy. You can do a lot with that much water. Jericho was also one of the only places in the area that balsam was harvested and processed, a rare, expensive, and much sought-after perfume in the ancient world. It's an ingredient in incense, and we add it, though not necessarily from Jericho, to the oil of chrism, the blessed oil we use in baptism, confirmation, and ordination. If you've ever smelled it before, it does smell pretty nice. Jericho was also the site of the winter palace of Herod the Great, so it was of political importance as well. All this is to say, despite being near the Dead Sea, Jericho was no backwater. It was an extremely wealthy place. And so we hear, a man was there named Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was rich. Zacchaeus was no ordinary tax collector, like the ones we hear praying in last Sunday's Gospel. Zacchaeus was a chief tax collector, or a tax farmer. The way this worked was that Rome allowed people to bid for the right to collect taxes in a certain region. Of course, this led to bidding wars. Rome got all the money in advance from the winning bid, and then it was up to the winner to employ tax collectors and their unscrupulous methods to make up the money they spent winning the bid. Knowing now what we know about Jericho, we can imagine just how rich and powerful Zacchaeus must have been in order to have won the bid to be chief tax collector of the Jericho plain. And it would have made him even more infamous than any ordinary tax collector. In fact, rabbis in Jesus' day considered that any house a chief tax collector entered was rendered unclean by that very fact. But let's pause for a moment and go back one chapter in Luke's Gospel to another rich and influential person who encounters Jesus. In chapter 18 of the Gospel of Luke, we hear a certain ruler asks Jesus, "Good teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" Jesus says to him, "You know the commandments. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not murder. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness. Honor your father and mother." And he says, "I have kept all of these since my youth." Wow. To be able to say that in public probably meant he was well respected. Zacchaeus would definitely not have been able to say the same thing in front of a crowd without some kind of reaction. But what did Jesus say in response to the ruler? "There is still one thing lacking. Sell all that you own, distribute the money to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then come, follow me." And when he heard this, he became sad, for he was very rich. One of my favorite sayings is from the late Cardinal Francis George, the previous Archbishop of Chicago, who said, "The only thing we take with us when we die is what we have given away." The only thing we take with us when we die is what we have given away. And when we look at the rich ruler and Zacchaeus from this perspective, we see something different. Not just that one was respectable and a conscientious public leader, while the other, basically the epitome of greed. That's not surprising. What is surprising is that Zacchaeus does something the honest, rich, and respectable ruler cannot. I may not be a math person, but to give away half of your possessions and then repay 4 times whatever you've cheated people, if you're a tax collector, basically amounts to sell all you own and distribute the money to the poor. We see in Zacchaeus a kind of freedom that the rich ruler does not have. But from where did he get this freedom? From the experience of being loved by Jesus. When Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said to him, "Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today." Remember, if a chief tax collector entered anyone's house, that house became ritually unclean. So Zacchaeus would never have even dreamed of entering Jesus's or anyone else's house for that matter, and to be able to sit down and share a meal with Jesus. It would have been disrespectful, and it would have put the owner in the house in a place of great inconvenience, not to mention what people would say. But here's Jesus offering to come to Zacchaeus' house, and we see the difference that it made. There are some things that only the experience of being loved can lead us to. And we really only experience being loved by Jesus, or by anyone for this matter, in our places of need. Ironically, our desire to be self-sufficient and even a good person can actually close us off to the experience of being loved. Nope, I'm good, thanks. If that is always the case with us, nobody, not even God, will make a difference in our lives. If I don't really need Jesus, He's not going to make a difference in my life. But if I can let Jesus come into those places in my life, those places of need, where I've tried for so long to get by on my own, then salvation will come to this house. And we will experience the freedom that can only come from the experience of being loved. That is the difference that God makes.